Shalom Aleichem. Today is Kaf Zayin Ba'adar Tavshin Peh, according to our calendar, corresponding to the 27th of March 2025, according to the Gregorian calendar. We continue in Hilchot Teshuvah, the Rambam, Perek Gimel Halacha Waw, Keshem Sheshokelim Avonoth Adam Uzechuyotho, or Zachiyotho, as you prefer. B'sha'ath mitotho, which we mentioned already, that a person's deeds are weighed in the balance when he leaves this world. Kach b'chol shana u'shana shokelim avonoth kol ehad ve'ehad miba'ei ha'olam im zechuyotho b'yom tov shel Rosh Hashanah. Similarly, a similar process takes place once a year on Rosh Hashanah. And this is true not only for the Jews, but for Kol Ba'ei Ha'olam. The Ramban and others explain that the Ramban writes about this in Torah Ha'adam, that the Heshbon, the Shikul that we are discussing here on Rosh Hashanah applies to this world, Na'olam Hazeh. In other words, what will be with this person in the coming year. As opposed to the Heshbon and the Shekilah, the weighing up in the balance that we mentioned earlier, which has to do with Olam Haba. So that which Rambam refers to here has to do with the Mishpat and the Din with regards to a person and his activities in this world and what will be with him in the coming year. Rambam continues, Misha nimsa sadiq, nehtam lahayim. He who is found righteous, nehtam lahayim. It also follows, therefore, that sadiq in this context means that in this heshbon, this weighing in the balance, this assessment that takes place on Rosh Hashanah, it does not refer to a Sadiq Gamur who is almost without fail, without exception, righteous and not on the level of the general public. That's not the meaning here. The word Sadiq is, as Rambam described it before, refers to, as Rambam said also in the first perek, that a Sadiq is someone who rov ma'asal tovim. But again, the cheshbon is only in the hands of Hashem. So Rambam continues, Misha nimsa Sadiq nehtam lahayim. And such a person is considered worthy to continue on in this world. Umisha nimsa rasha nehtam lemitha. And he who is considered to be negative and undesirable in this world, the mishpat on Rosh Hashanah is such that he will no longer continue to exist in this world. Benoni, and he who is 50-50, Tolin lo ad Yom Kippurim. His mishpat and his din and his final status is left open until Yom Kippurim. Im asa teshuvah, nehtam lahayim. V'im lo, nehtam lemitha. If he does teshuvah in that time, and that's why this time is referred to as Aseret Yomei Teshuvah, he will be judged worthy to continue on in this world. Nehtam l'hayim, v'im lo nehtam l'mitha, and if not, the opposite. And having mentioned Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippurim, Rambam now continues with the following. Af al pi, this is now halacha zayin or dalid. Af al pi shetki'at shofar b'Rosh Hashanah gezerat hakatuv, even though it is a fact that the Torah does not explain, does not, you could almost say does not even hint, but that would be perhaps too categorical. There are hints in the Torah, but it's not explicit, and therefore it's a gezerat hakatuv. Remez or Ramaz Yeshbo. So we have the mitzvah of Tekiyat Shofar, but we do not know why. Rambam says there is a remez to be understood from this mitzvah, which involves producing a loud noise, a loud sound, like an air raid alarm or siren. Kolomar, Oru Yeshanim Mishenatchem, or Mishinatchem. Wake up, you people who are generally asleep. W'haqisu nirdomim mitadematchem. Wake up from your slumber. W'happesu b'ma'asechem. Examine your deeds. W'hizru b'teshuvah. Do not simply continue as before. W'zichru bora'achem. And remember your Creator. And to whom is this directed? Says Rambam. Elu hashokachim et ha'emet b'havlei hazaman. Most people are in this category. This refers to people who tend to live day to day without very much thought or introspection. They are carried along through their lives like flotsam on the waves in the ocean. They just sort of drift from place to place, from event to event, from day to day, without any particular direction or destination. V'shorim kol shenatham behevel urik, asher lo yu'in v'lo yathli. And they spend their days, their entire years, all their time, from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, or from Yom Kippur to Yom Kippur, with emptiness and frivolous, meaningless things, asher lo yu'in v'lo yathli, things that do not truly benefit a human being, such as, for example, striving to be famous or recognized or receive honors and accolades and what have you. As the Mishneh states in Masechet Avot, amongst the things that are mentioned there, hakavod mosiyat ha'adam min ha'olam. Redifat hakavod, striving for kavod, recognition, fame, lead a person astray and cause them to adopt a completely incorrect and essentially empty goals, and also lead them to act in ways in order to achieve those goals, which they themselves know are improper, until a person reaches a point perhaps where they no longer recognize even that what they're doing is reprehensible. So Rambam says the shofar, as it were, cries out to the average man and says, Oru yeshanim mishenatchem, uhakisu nidamim mitadematchem, uhapasu b'ma'asechem, uhizru b'teshuvah, uzichru bora'achem. Remember who you are, where you are, remember that each day that passes does not return. And this is exactly the point that he makes again here. Elu hashokachim et ha'emet, who forget these basic truths. בהבלי הזמן, ושוגים כל שנתם בהבל וריק, אשר לא יועיל ולא יציל. The shofar cries out and says, Habito lenafshotechem. Take note. Think about the spiritual aspects of your existence and your eventual end. وَهِتِّفُوا دَرْخِخَمْ وَمَعْلَلَيْخَمْ, and examine and improve and change your ways, your actions. وَيَعْزَوْ كُلْ أَحَدْ مِكَمْ دَرْكَهُ هَرَعَةً وَمَحَشَفْتَهُ أَشَارَ لَا طَوَى. لَفِخَخ, says Rambam in now Halacha Hayth, or still a continuation of Daled. לפיכך צריך כל אדם שיראה עצמו כל השנה כולה כאילו הסיו זכאי והסיו חייב, וכן כל העולם. A person should train himself to view himself throughout the year as if he is walking a very, very fine line, and as if he is being weighed in the balance and found to be very, very much on the borderline. وَخَيْنْ كُلْ هَعُلَمْ, and the same is true for all of society, entire world. That's what a person should think, and how one should approach such matters. One should not assume that one is okay, basically doing the right thing. Again, because for amongst other reasons, one does not know how to weigh up all these things in the balance. Only Hashem knows that. وَخَيْنْ كُلْ هَعُلَمْ حَسْيَوْ زَكَاي وَحَسْيَوْ حَيَوْ. So if the world itself is in the balance, is hanging in the balance, it follows, حَتَّى هَتْ أَحَدْ, a person sins in this or that manner, he tilts the scale, לצד חובה. הרי הכריע עצמו והכריע את העולם, את כל העולם כולו לכף חובה. He tips the balance against himself and against the world. In other words, a person should also view himself not only as an individuum, but as part of a greater whole. It is not correct to say that a person should not consider his own situation, his own station, and his own personal outcomes, shall we say. But it is also equally true, perhaps even more the case, that a person should view himself as one tiny part of a much greater whole, and one is responsible for that whole. That is what Rambam is stating here. הרי הכריע עצמו והכריע את כל העולם כולו לכף חובה וגרם להם השחתה. And by behaving in a manner which is mushhat, which is corrupt, improper, wrong, immoral, one is poisoning the well, as it were, not just oneself, but the well completely, the water supply for everybody. Asa miswa ahat, and the opposite is also true. If a person did the right thing, asa miswa ahat, hare hikhri'a et asmo, hikhri'a et kol ha'olam kulo lechav zechut. He tilted the scale for the better, for himself and for the entire world. وَغَرَمْ لَهَمْ تَشُعَى وَهَسَّرَى, and thus brings about Teshuvah, salvation, and being saved from all manner of things. So we see here that which we see throughout the Torah. What Rambam is saying here is not a chidush. It is mentioned in the Torah, in the Nevi'im, almost innumerable times, that walking in the way of Hashem brings Teshuvah, salvation, and leads to positive outcomes, and doing the opposite leads to the opposite outcome. Zeu shene'emar u'tzadik yesod olam. And this is one way of understanding the pasuk, at least in Mishneh, that the tzaddik is, as it were, the pillar on which the world rests. The person who made himself the tzaddik, he's not only a tzaddik for himself, he's also yesod olam. He's also bringing about a better reality and a better world and a better outcome for the entire world. And as we shall discuss later in this perek and elsewhere, it follows, therefore, that certain kinds of people, certain kinds of actions lead to the opposite, to hashhatha, lead to corruption, and therefore to destruction, and to all kinds of divine punishment. The most obvious and explicit example of this, of course, is the Mabul. So there we see how the Olam Kulo, Mushaf, leads to Hashhatha, when the entire world is corrupt, or the overwhelming majority thereof. This leads to general destruction. So that's an extreme black and white manifestation and demonstration of this principle. But of course, there are many, many, many shades of grey. And Rambam continues and says, Halachat Taif, or Dalet still, Umipane Inyan Zeh, and for this reason, as we have just explained, Noharu Kol Bet Yisrael Leharboth B'Tzedakah U'Ma'asim Tovim. It is the general, universal practice of Bet Yisrael. Bet Yisrael means the Jewish people who walk in the ways of Hashem, B'derech Hashem, who are Talmidehem Shel Avraham Avinu. Laharboth B'Tzedakah U'Ma'asim Tovim. To give more to charity and other acts of positive, kind acts of Gemilut Hasadim, for example. Ula'asok b'mitzvot, and to be more concerned and more circumspect as to the performance of various mitzvot, or looking at things that need to be taken care of that are often ignored. This is the right time of year to do these things, says Rambam here, to be more spiritually attuned, shall we say, and more sensitive during this period. Merosh Hashanah wa'ad Yom Kippurim, yafer mikol yomot Hashanah, more than the rest of the year. All year long, we should be striving to be in this state of mind, but even more particularly during these days, from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippurim. ונהגו כולם לקום בלילה בעשרת ימים אלו ולהתפלל בבתי כנסיות בדברי תחנונים ודברי כיבושים עד שיאור היום. And therefore, it is the general practice, ונהגו כולם לקום בלילה, to rise at night, that is to say, in the early morning, בעשרת ימים אלו, during these days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, ולהתפלל בבתי כנסיות, to get up and gather in the Bet Knesset, what we call today Selichot, b'divrei Tahanunim, that's Selichot, and Nefilat Apayim, etc. With divrei Kibushim. Divrei Kibushim refers to essentially something like a sermon or what in yeshivot is sometimes referred to as a musa shmuz. In other words, it could be a shiur or some kind of a talk which aims to awaken people from the slumber that we mentioned earlier, ad shiur hayom, until daybreak, and at which time they would daven, follows, and then people would go on to their daily activities. B'sha'a halacha yodo, hey, b'sha'a sheshokelim avonoth adam im zechuyoto, when this weighing in the balance takes place, and mehashavim alo tehilat arvon shehatabu, v'lo sheni ela mishelishi ve'elach. This heshbon begins, as it were, from the third head that the person performs. And if making the calculation in that fashion, from the third onwards, he is found to be generally hayav, then all things, including the former actions before that third, are all taken into account. This should not be understood to mean that the original actions before that third action are simply ignored. No, that's not the case. In terms of the overall heshbon, the overall assessment that takes place at that time, in terms of making an overall a general assessment, a comprehensive assessment, then it is done in this fashion, from the third onwards. But if, as we said, and then too, if he is found to be hayav, in other words, he is found generally to be hayav rather than zakai, then everything is taken into account for that purpose. But for the olam, there is no such thing as a withur, as something simply being wiped away and not being taken into account. And Rambam continues and states, "Ve'im nimsa'u zechuyotho keneged avonotho asher me'avon shlishi ve'elach ma'avirim kol avonotho rishon." לפי שהשלישי נחשב ראשון שכבר נמחלו השניים, וכן הרביעי הרי הוא ראשון שכבר נמחל השלישי, וכן עד סופם. And again, this refers to the cheshbon of Rosh Hashanah, which we said before, refers to that which awaits a person ba'olam hazeh, in this world. So if from the third onwards he is considered to be zakai, more than hayav, in other words, he rov zechuyotav merubim al avonotav, then ma'avirim kol avonotav rishon. So then the assessment is such that he ends up being considered zakai. Again, for the purpose of this world, of this cheshbon of Rosh Hashanah. B'med devarim amurim, says Rambam, this is all true, halacha yod bet, or a continuation of hey, b'yachid, with regards to the individual. Shene'emar hen kol ele yif'al el pa'amayim shalosh im gaver. Gaver implies an individual, a person, a man. This is how Hashem works, as it were. Pa'amayim shalosh im gaver. Aval hasibur tolim lahem avon rishon v'sheni u'shlishi. The sibur, as we have mentioned in other contexts, the sibur has a special status. Klal Yisrael has a special status. Similar to the term Rambam used before, when we spoke about Selihot. Rambam said, "Mahu kol Bet Yisrael." Bet Yisrael is not just the present general Jewish public that exists at a particular time in history. Bet Yisrael is also Klal Yisrael. Bet Yisrael is also, and specifically, a spiritual, philosophical concept. It is a spiritual entity in and of its own right. So here we see that the weighing up is done differently. The Sibur is always above the Yahid. Here we're discussing the assessment that both the individual and Bet Yisrael, Klal Yisrael, the way they are assessed on Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippurim, and in general. And as we have said before, in other contexts, regarding, for example, hostage deals and such discussions and considerations, the individual must be considered secondary in importance to Klal Yisrael. That is also common sense, and it is also a very fundamental and essential Torah concept. And this is a concept that when you think about it, can only have real meaning and significance in Am Yisrael, within the Jewish people. In other words, if you were to ask a Frenchman today, well, let's first talk about today. If you were to ask them, are you willing to fight for France, the French nation? Some may say yes, others may say no, but many would say nowadays, no, I'm not willing, because I don't consider that to be worth endangering my life for. This discussion, by the way, is taking place right now in the UK, for example. In the UK, because of the very unsatisfactory state of their armed forces, they have something apparently like 50,000 people in uniform, something along those lines, which is difficult to believe when you think that a little over 100 years ago we were talking about the most powerful empire on the planet. So there is discussion of perhaps reintroducing the draft, the military draft. And a lot of people in the UK are saying, you can make all the laws you like, even if you choose to do that. They haven't done that yet. But at least the Britain that I see today, I'm not willing to fight for. Which, if you were to find yourself in Britain, then you would understand, because the country is truly coming apart at the seams for all kinds of reasons. many of which have to do with mass immigration and population replacement. At any rate, the point is that in order to be willing to fight for your nation, you have to understand why your nation is worth fighting for, and why your position and the importance of your own existence is subordinate to that greater good, or that larger concept and reality. And it is increasingly difficult, extremely difficult for most young people in the Western world today to explain to themselves why they would possibly consider their country, their nation, to be more important than themselves. Am Yisrael is the only nation that has can truly answer that question to itself. In other words, a Jew can provide himself with the answer to that large question mark. Why am I willing? Why should I be willing? And therefore, why am I required to act in a certain way and to do certain things for the Jewish nation? Because the Jewish nation, which is again supra-historical concept, and is an eternal concept, not specific to any generation of Jews in the world at a specific time. That is the most sublime and the most meaningful and significant reality that exists in this world. And when one understands that, then one can begin to discuss questions such as why should a Jew lay his life down or endanger himself for his people, or why is it incorrect and misguided and very, very harmful to the Jewish nation to allow themselves to be blackmailed and to water down their war effort in order to receive certain individual Jews in return for some concession or something along those lines. That is all that mode of thinking, that everything is about saving this or that individual Jew, is correct only when viewing reality and when existing in a reality of galuth. When we're not talking about Klal Yisrael, we're not talking about a nation, we're talking about a collection of individuals. And also it refers to a situation where the Jewish people do not have perhaps the wherewithal, they do not have the capability of fighting their enemies or behaving in a different fashion. Applying the galuth reality to the normative reality of a Jewish nation is one of the greatest perversions that we can possibly conceive of when running the Jewish people's affairs. Okay, Halacha Yod Gimel. Habenonim.
Rabbi,
Yes.
in the previous few halachot, when the Rambam was talking about the first and second and third Awonoth, what is that order? What is that ordering in reference to? Is it first, second, and third after Rosh Hashanah, or in severity, or any other kind of metric?
I believe it to be chronological from Rosh Hashanah. Yes, that is my understanding. Okay, Habenonim, people who are found to be are weighed in the balance and found to be on the borderline, neither clearly Sadiq or clearly Rasha. אם היה בכלל מחצה עוונות שלהם, שלא הניח תפילין מעולם, if among the avonot, the averot, the bitul mitzvah of tefillin is one of that he never wore tefillin, if that is found to be amongst his actions, danim otho kefi hapta'o, he is judged according to his deeds. V'yesh lo helek l'olam haba. In other words, even a person who deliberately, we're not talking about a person who did not know, was unaware, or was anus, was in a situation where the tefillin were not available, deliberately did not wear tefillin because he chose not to do so. He will be judged, even though you could view his situation as being balanced between good and evil. Nevertheless, because of the centrality of the mitzvah of tefillin, and he never wore tefillin at all, this tips the balance and means that he will be considered to be a rasha, and he will be judged for all of his actions as a rasha, as a person who tipped the balance towards the undesirable and the evil. So this tells us something about the centrality of and the importance of the mitzvah of tefillin. וכן, כל הרשעים שעוונותיהם מרובים. By the way, I want to stress, you understand, we should understand, and it's clear from what Rambam says here, and it's also clear from the Makorot, the sources in Hazal on which Rambam is basing himself here. The concept that is mentioned in the Talmud of Karkafta de la Manach Tefileh, literally the scalp that did not wear tefillin, is referring clearly to someone who never wore tefillin, not to someone who did not wear tefillin on a given day, shall we say, even if that was deliberate. That's not what we're discussing. We're discussing someone who never wore tefillin. In other words, a general zilzul and rejection of this mitzvah. Again, and also not for reasons of ones, not because he was prevented by circumstance from doing so, but because he chose to do so. וכן, כל הרשעים שעוונותיהם מרובים, and the same is also true for all those who are considered to be רשעים, because their עוונות המרובים, דנים אותם כפי חטאותיהם. They are judged according to their actions. ויש להם חלק לעולם הבא. Rambam is mentioning this here because we are going to move presently on to a discussion of those who do not have a heretic, Jews who are lichora part of Beit Yisrael to begin with, but lose their heretic and their connection to exactly what we discussed, to Beit Yisrael, to Kalal Yisrael. That is what the Mishneh in Sanhedrin is discussing. Kol Yisrael yesh laim halak l'olam haba. Kol Yisrael is Beit Yisrael, is Kalal Yisrael. In the supra-historical and intellectual, philosophical, spiritual sense. And a person can lose that status. It is possible to lose that status, but not everybody who is sinful, not everyone who deliberately acts not in accordance with the Torah, they will be judged and they will be punished, but they still remain part of Klal Yisrael. So when Rambam says here, "V'chen kol harashaim," he's referring to what he said a moment before, and was just as the average Jew who is neither one nor the other, neither tzaddik nor rasha, has a heretic l'olam haba. So all rashaim, all Jews who sin, who deride, even in they make light of the Torah, and they do not take things seriously, etc. That does not mean they have lost their connection to the Jewish people in that broad spiritual philosophical sense. And that's what Rambam now stresses. Shekol Yisrael yesh lahem heretic le'olam haba. All people included within this concept of Kolal Yisrael or Bet Yisrael, or just as the Mishnah says, Kol Yisrael yesh lahem heretic le'olam haba. They all have such a part in Olam Haba, because Olam Haba is the ultimate and true reality for Klal Yisrael, and that is their destination. Afal Pishe Halta'u, even though they sinned, that is true. They were not exemplary in their lifetime on this earth. Nevertheless, they are part of Klal Yisrael. Shene'emar wa'amich kulan tzadikim le'olam yirashu aras. In other words, in an essential, fundamental way, all Am Yisrael are considered tzaddikim. In other words, they're all part of this kolal, of this Bet Yisrael, that has this eternal connection to Hashem, which manifests itself in their existence ba'olam haba. Aras zo mashal, as Rambam explains, as Chazal explain also clearly from the way they adoresh this pasuk. Aras, which refers, you would think, to a land or a place, is a mashal, and it means Aras HaHayim, which is a term which appears already in the Tanakh, Aras HaHayim, and it's clear in certain places, at least in the Tanakh, that Aras HaHayim refers to Olam Haba. V'chen hasidei umot ha'olam, and this is also true for particularly righteous Gentiles. Yesh lahem heretic le'olam haba. They too have a heretic le'olam haba. In order to be a hasid umot ha'olam, you have to be someone who rejects all foreign religious systems and notions, accepts that the Torah is the word of Hashem, and that Hashem chose the Jewish people, and that you as a Gentile are required to follow the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, because this was what Hashem revealed to Moshe Rabbeinu, as Rambam discusses in Hilchot Melachim. A person who adopts that position, that attitude, and that way of life is a Hasid Umot HaOlam. And they also have a Heretical Olam Haba, albeit a different, qualitatively and quantitatively a different type of Heretic, but nevertheless they have a Heretical Olam Haba. And now, having discussed these things, Rambam says, continuing in the same vein, you must know that there are those who forfeit their connection to the Jewish people. It's because they forfeit their connection to the Jewish people that they forfeit their Heretical Olam Haba. It is, as we said before, the Jew is never viewed entirely as an atomized individual. The Jew is part of the Jewish people, as we shall discuss presently. And if, for example, a Jew is righteous in many, many ways, but acts against the interests of the Jewish people, that also, as we shall see, severs that bond between himself and his nation, and between not just the physical nation or the other Jews in his generation, but severs the tie between himself and Kolal Yisrael for all time. So Rambam says, وَأَلُوا شَأَنْ لَهَمْ حَلَكْ رَعْلَمْ هَبَا أَلَا نِخْرَثِمْ وَأَوْذِمْ وَنِدُّنِمْ عَلْ قَدَرْ رِشْعًا وَهَبْتَثَمْ لِعُلَمْ وَلَعُلَمِ عُلَمِيمْ. There are Jews who forfeit this connection to Hashem and the Jewish people, and therefore Olam Haba, because as we said, Olam Haba is simply, as it were, the normative state of affairs for the Jewish people and their coexistence in Hashem's world with Hashem. So if you lose your connection to Hashem and the Jewish people, Mimela, you lose your connection to Olam Haba. You cease to be a member of the club. You have to go out of your way, perhaps, to be such a person, but it is possible. And that's what Rambam now lists. This is the list of people. Haminim, and Rambam will explain each of these terms. Wa epikorosim, wa koforim b'Torah, wa hakoforim b'tchiat hamethim, wa koforim b'viat hagoel, in other words, Biat HaMashiach, והמשומדים, ומחטאי הרבים, והפורשים מדרכי ציבור, והעושה עבירות ביד רמה, בפרהסיה, כהויקים, he who sins in a open, deliberate and demonstrative fashion in public. That's what it means, ביד רמה בפרהסיה. In other words, what is referred to by Hazal, as well as the term used here, he is koret tigar al Hashem. In other words, he deliberately wishes to anger and demonstrate his complete lack of regard for everything the Torah states. And another category, وَهَمُسِرِينَ وَأُمَّقِلَ, another category, مَقِلَ إِمَا عَلْ هَسِبُورِ شْلَوْ لَشَمْ شَمَيْ وَشَفِخَ دَمِيمْ وَعَلَى لَشَنْ هَرَى وَمُشَيْخ أُرْلَثَوْ. So that's quite a long list. Let us first begin to break all these things down. So Rambam says the first category he mentioned was Haminim, Hamisha hem anikraim minim. There are 5 types of person, Jew, who's referred to as a min. We're talking here about Jews. It is true that the term haminim, or min, referring to the individual, is used not infrequently by Hazal to refer even to non-Jews, but in a different context, in a different in a different manner. And the reason for this is because very often the term minim or min refers to a Christian, that is to say, followers of the what was at that time a relatively newfangled religion called Christianity, which, as we know, was originally entirely a Jewish phenomenon. It was another sect or cult within the Jewish people that broke away from mainstream Judaism and from Chazal. Over time, it became most of the Christians were no longer Jewish, but in fact were Gentiles to begin with. But the term stuck. The term minim, referring to those who believed in the divinity of and the messianic role of Yeshua HaNotzri, Shem Roshaim Yirkav, that name which was applied initially to Jews who adopted those positions, continued to be used with regards to the Gentiles who joined that movement. And there were many such people, as we know, among the Gentiles. In the Roman Empire, for example, it was this religion which was viewed as, in many ways, as undesirable, as a threat to imperial power, and the status quo, the establishment of the Roman Empire, and therefore it was persecuted. These people were persecuted. Eventually, it became Haminuth Hafecha Lamalchuth. The Minuth became the ruling power. There's the force and the power that underpinned the Roman Empire for a time. So first of all, we have to make that distinction between what we're discussing here, which is minim, which refers to Jews, and the term minim, which refers in other situations, such as, shall we say, Masechet Hulin, referring to shehita. So there, a min is not necessarily a Jew. It could be a Jew who adopted one of these religious ideologies and positions, but it usually refers to a non-Jew who is an Oved Avodah Zarah, because Avodah Zarah and Minuth almost always go together. Keep in mind that in those days there were not that many atheists or agnostics. So a min often in those contexts, in those discussions, refers to a non-Jew who is a stout believer in some Avodah Zarah. And therefore, Lamashal, we assume that if such a person slaughtered an animal, that he had some thought or intention regarding Avodah Zarah, the Avodah Zarah in which he believes, and his act of slaughtering, of the shehita. But that's a different discussion. So Hamish, and another thing we need to mention here is that if one checks I won't even bother to call this up on the screen and show you physically, as it were, the censored texts, but one has to be aware that these halachot, particularly, apart from the general state of the censored texts, when it comes to such discussions as these, the terminologies were completely upended, and certain terms were replaced with other terms, so it's very confusing, and therefore one should simply ignore all such censored texts, and one should refer to a text as such as we have before us, which Baruch Hashem today we do. And therefore, some of these things that were less clear, even to some of the poskim, because of the censorship, are today very straightforward. So, Hamisha he hanikra'im minim. There are 5 categories that we refer to as minim. Ha'omer she'en sham Eloah wa'en la'olam manhir. So first of all is an atheist. That is a min. That is one category, or one definition of the concept of min. A person who says there's no creator, there is no ultimate eternal being, and the world is hefker. And wa'en la'olam manhir. And this is a very important point that needs to be stressed, because the moment you adopt that position, you immediately are saying, by definition, en la'olam manhir, there is no order, there is no one in charge, and there is no one to take note of anything that you do or do not do. And therefore, mimela, despite many people's protestations to the opposite, atheism will always lead, certainly for the vast majority of people who adopt that position. There may be some individuals who are exceptional in this regard, and for various reasons that they explain to themselves, they wish to live their lives in a certain manner according to some moral code and what have you. There are such people, but that does not work for a society. It does not work for 99% of human beings. Once you tell people, En Sham Eloah, wa En La'olam Manhir, En Sham, the word means there is not in existence. Just as we say in English, there is not. The same is true in Arabic, but not in Hebrew. So Rambam is thinking in Arabic here and writing in Hebrew. האומר שאין שם אלוה ואין לעולם מנהיג, that results ממילא in corruption, and the world descends into a terrible state. Another category, והאומר שאין, or definition of min, והאומר שיש שם מנהיג, אבל הם שניים או יותר. Alternately, someone who says, I believe in gods, not one God, I believe in various gods. Well, the moment you have a system based on more than one ultimate creator and being, then again there is no clear moral imperative. Then you have different gods, different agendas, different aims, as we know from many sources. Take the classical sources. One can mention here the classical texts of the Greeks and the Romans, and how they describe people trying to appease that god or this god, and how the gods themselves, excuse me, how the gods themselves, as they perceive these things, were fighting amongst themselves. In other words, in general, what you're dealing with is a moral wasteland, because there cannot be any moral order, and there cannot be any cogent reason why you must follow this or that path of behavior, or this or that the attitude or system, because reality itself is without system and without clear purpose, and without a central commanding theme and creator, and therefore you do as you please. So these beliefs must and do always lead to moral corruption. והאומר שיש שם ריבון אחד, אלא שהוא גוף ובעל תמונה. Rambam here states that a person who believes in one creator, but that this creator is a being that exists in the material, physical realm. It's not that this creator is much greater in size, shall we say, than a human being, but is nevertheless a material being. This point, by the way, is not agreed to by all. As the Ravad points out here, the Ravad doesn't say he believes this. He says that there are those who are good Jews and who believe that Hashem has a corporeal reality and exists in the material world, and they're not to be considered minim. They're mistaken and they're foolish, but they're not to be considered minim. Rambam considers such an idea, such a notion, to be heretical in the extreme, and that a person who believes such is considered a min. It is true that we do not find this statement explicitly mentioned anywhere in Chazal. That's why it is not universally agreed to. וכן, האומר שאינו לבדו, ראשון, מוסור לכל. In other words, he who believes what is referred to in our ancient sources, philosophical sources, as olam kadmon. In other words, that the world exists and coexists with this supreme being, and that the creator did not precede the created world. And this too, when one examines such a position, this too leads to And inevitably, inexorably, it leads to a person viewing reality in a different way. As Rabbi Yitzchak Bar-Hayim, for example, points out, if you believe that the world, the creation, the reality which we see around us, exists in and of its own right, coexists with the Creator, did not come into existence because of the Creator, then you cannot explain to yourself or to anybody else how it is that this Creator can override the, as it were, the laws of nature and create something which is supernatural. וכן, another category, וכן העובד אלוה זולתו, כדי להיות מליץ בינו ובין ריבון העולמים. A person may believe in a Borei Olam, a creator, a supreme being, but this supreme being is viewed by them as so remote and inaccessible that they have some medium, some go-between that they turn to connect them to the ultimate source. This, of course, can be seen clearly in Christianity. And in other systems that exist around the world. And in the Jewish world today, we see this clearly with reference to a particular Hasidic sect situated on Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn. Kol echad mihamisha elu min. All such people, or anyone who fits any of these definitions, is considered amin, according to Rambam. In other words, what we see, if we were to sum up all these various definitions, the common denominator is that their belief, their philosophical and theological belief system is what condemns them to being considered amin. Not talking about an action. You don't have to do anything. You have to think or believe a certain thing. So if you believe that the only way to connect to Hashem is through Yeshua HaNosri or a particular Rebbe, then you have adopted this position of a melis beno leven ribon ha'olamim. And this idea is foreign to the Torah, always has been and always will be. We'll leave it here for today. There are many other things that need to be discussed in this regard, but we'll leave it here for today. Heyu beruchim.
Rabbi.
Yes?
We see in what we learned today, and also in other places in the halakha, like with the Zaken Mamre, that the mitzvah of tefillin is given a very important standing compared to the other mitzvot. Why is that the case?
Why?
Yes. Why specifically are tefillin so important as compared to all the other mitzvot that we do?
Well, that's a good question, a legitimate question. Perhaps it has to do with the fact that, again, we're talking about someone, a person who never wore tefillin. There are only a couple of ways that this could happen to a Jewish person. Either they were brought up in a society, in a community, in a home where this concept was unknown, as were other Jewish concepts unknown and not taken seriously. In which case, That is now a separate discussion. That's a discussion of whether this person is a tinok nishba, which we can discuss later in this, which it is relevant to this discussion, but not at this moment. But here we're talking about a person, let's say, who knows. He knows about the mitzvah of tefillim. He knows about the mitzvah of Shabbat, and as he knows about the mitzvah of even reciting Kriyat Shema twice a day. He knows about this mitzvah, and he even maybe performs the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema. But the tefillin, he couldn't be bothered. Now, what is unique about, now it might be true that he couldn't be bothered to perform other mitzvot as well. It might not be, may not suit him to build a sukkah and live in a sukkah for 7 days. It might be the case, even though he's fully aware of it. It just is too lazy and too not sufficiently concerned with doing the will of Hashem, or more concerned with doing what suits him at any given moment, which of course is something which is likely to lead, almost not just likely, is almost certain to lead a person astray in many, many ways. It could be that tefillim is something which is, I think you could describe it as a kind of intimate connection to Hashem. You are wearing something on your person. It's almost like tying a Sefer Torah to one's person. And it is indicative of the fact that we, Klal Yisrael, have this special intimate connection with Hashem. And if a person simply looks with this disdain at such a mitzvah and such a concept, which, by the way, he may be lazy and that's why he doesn't do it, but it's obviously a relatively easy mitzvah to perform. Let's for now talk about wearing tefillin, just half an hour a day. It might be more difficult. It might require a little bit more determination and a bit more motivation to wear tefillin many hours during the day, shall we say, in different situations. But as most Jews have been doing for a long time, for many generations, to put on tefillin in the morning, to recite Kriyat Shema, Hilchot, and Shmoneh Esrei, and whatever, that's not a terribly difficult thing to do. Really not difficult at all. Many people do it without thinking, which is also not good, but they do it as a matter of course, as something habitual, which doesn't require thought at all. Again, not true, but it's better than not doing it, definitely. But this person simply couldn't be bothered. He'd rather, just get on with. He has a business to run, and he gets up in the morning, and he wants to drink his espresso and run off to the office because he has to make sure that things are running smoothly, and he has all these issues to deal with, which he probably does. Running a business can be very intense and time-consuming and distracting. But this is not important to him. This connection to Hashem is not important to him. If a person goes through life that way, never wears tefillin, even though he could have worn tefillin, maybe his parents bought him a pair of tefillin and he has them in the cupboard, but he doesn't look at them. He ignores them. And he knows all about it, but he couldn't care less. Now, this same person may keep Shabbat. He may keep Shabbat every week. He may not do anything that you're not supposed to do on Shabbat. Although that also is perhaps dubious. If a person is so uncaring with vis-a-vis the mitzvah of tefillin that he never wears them at all, never wore them throughout his life, then and even though he was not an anus and he was not a katinok shenishba, well, then it's a deliberate choice. And if it's a deliberate choice, this expresses sha'at benefesh. Sha'at benefesh means disgust, disdain. It's beneath me. It was a silly idea. Why would I want to do that, etc. That is indicative of a tremendous disconnect between the person and Hashem. It's not like a person who every Tuesday goes to a certain store where no one is looking, and he maybe removes his kippah or something because he has to have a squid salad every Tuesday. He just that's what he likes to do, and he can't give up on his squid salad. Okay, so he runs off to some Chinese restaurant or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be Chinese, but amongst other possibilities, and he orders his squid salad for lunch because that's what this particular Jew decided he's going to do with himself. Well, if you ask him, why did you do that? Why do you know it's a sword? He says, yeah, I know, but it's just so tasty, it's so delicious, I can't control myself. That's something different, because the Yetzer Hara can lead a person to adopt such a ridiculous position and deliberately consume some forbidden foodstuff. There's no particular Yetzer Hara that would lead a person not to wear tefillin deliberately throughout his life. There's no such thing. Unless we're talking about something which is already, it's not Yetzer Hara in the simple, visceral sense, that I have to have my bacon and eggs once a week, otherwise I just, I can't get by. That's a base ta'awah. That's a very simple, animalistic, uncontrolled impulse. Nothing to be proud of, but it's also not unheard of. Whereas total disdain for a mitzvah, particularly the mitzvah of tefillin, which expresses this intimate connection with Hashem, that's already not to be viewed as simply a material, physical matter, or a Yetzer Hara which sets a person off on a sinful path. That already bespeaks an ideological or philosophical or spiritual position. Otherwise, it's difficult to understand why a person would deliberately not wear tefillin all throughout his life. It has to be based on some deep-seated spiritual malady, just as the categories of minim that we just discussed are also all deep-seated spiritual maladies. A person who believes that in order to connect to Hashem, I must connect to this individual in the sense that I turn to this person and pray to this person, and that I can have no relationship with Hashem without first having this relationship with this individual human being, not in the sense of a chacham who teaches other Jews and instructs them and directs them, but in the sense that this individual is some kind of a god or demigod. Well, that's a deep-seated and terribly pernicious spiritual malady, such that it essentially destroys and makes any real connection, authentic connection to Hashem, impossible. And that's why it is so serious. In the same way, a person who deliberately has couldn't be bothered to wear tefillin throughout his life, it has to be based on some spiritual, philosophical bent that somehow he adopted or became convinced of or found convenient to adopt. Very well, we'll stop here for today. היו ברוכים, חזקו ויאמץ לבבכם. כל המייחלים לאדוני, שלום וניצחון על כל אויביהם. מבית ומחוץ. Our discussion today also has a lot to do with oyevim mibayith, not only מן החוץ. בשורות טובות, ישועות ונקמות וממילא נחמות. שלום שלום.